possession of medicinal marijuana by the, I think there were 2 defendants in that case, was fully lawful under California's then law with regard to medicinal marijuana. The federal government came in, prosecuted, and the issue then before the court was whether or not the Commerce Clause extended to allow the government to do that. If you look at it objectively, certainly it's a ludicrous extension of the Commerce Clause. What the government, the federal government, that is saying is, well, you're engaging, you're utilizing marijuana grown in California for use in California. You're not buying or selling it. You're growing it for your own use. But if you didn't have it, you'd be forced to buy it on the market, and therefore there's that potential impact on commerce. And Justice Scalia, known sort of in common parlance as one of the more conservative justices, found that okay. It'll be very interesting to see how those same justices deal with the Commerce Clause power and the extension of it in the case of the health care legislation when it gets to the court. I don't know, Mike, whether the Tea Party's really taken an issue or taken a position on drug legislation or legalization or medicinal marijuana. They seem to have, to some extent, perhaps wisely, limited their primary focus to tax, government spending, size of government issues, and have stayed, largely at least, stayed away from the social issues that are more divisive. The Libertarian Party, there are certainly degrees of folks in the Libertarian Party, some of which believe there ought to be no laws on individual use or purchase of any so-called controlled substances. But there certainly is, I'd say, probably universal acceptance of the doctrine that certainly medicinal marijuana is not an appropriate area for the government to be regulating, particularly from a criminal law standpoint. But how governments deal with that, where you have a state that has passed a law or referendum, a proposition, as California has done, that is contrary to the federal law, and then the federal law comes in, the federal authorities come in and trump state law, presents very important issues, to my way of thinking, of federalism and constitutional abuse that it's sort of interesting to see a lot of conservatives trying to wiggle around that one. They say, oh, we're for state power versus federal power, but it's okay for the federal government to come in and do that. We're for individual liberty and not government power, but it's okay for the. So it's a very interesting topic, certainly.
Would you like to say
well,
something?
no, I mean, that's why I do really love libertarians by and large, because they just, really, they go straight at it. I mean, everybody, well, especially the inconsistency among some Democrats, but more like, conservative Republicans. And if, conservatives are against big government, if it's going to do something about minimum wage or something else, but, it's all right to go in and figure out what's going on, either, in somebody's bedroom or with, marijuana. But when I was a kid, actually, they used to call smoking marijuana blasting tea, so maybe the guy who started the Tea Party really started.
I just learned something.
My third question concerns the overlap between progressives, left-leaning liberals, Tea Partiers, and Libertarians on the issue of national defense. First, how much should be spent on national defense? And second, what should be the goals of national defense be? Should we concentrate on policing, resources, or only on self-defense?
Well, national defense means defense of the nation. It does not mean nation building, especially in a tribal nation like Afghanistan, where going back to Alexander the Great, and you could go through the great empires and leaders in history, have not been able to do much with Afghanistan, and every one of them kind of lived next door. But the only thing I can say, and I don't think he was there when Bob's there, is a wonderful man named George Mahon. from Texas. Actually, Phil Graham took his place, so he wasn't there, from Lubbock. And he chaired the Appropriations Committee, and they had cut the appropriation budget to $105 billion. Tells you how long ago that was. And the Republicans wanted to raise more money, and Mr. Mahon got up. He says, well, I believe that $105 billion prudently spent would be sufficient for the needs of our national defense. Our national defense is driven by some kind of, if the right word, xenophobia, but it's also driven by the arms industry. You're a general, you're an admiral, you go to work for Northrop, you go to work for who the hell ever, you talk to your buddies, and the next thing there's money in the budget, and they wait. I mean, everybody wastes money, except maybe if you're like a senior citizen, on Social Security, you haven't got enough to waste. But they just have to refine that, and I saw today briefly in the New York Times, I think, that the Republicans are now actually, as they talk about cutting things, because if you don't cut the defense budget, you're not going to cut crap. That they're talking about literally, taking a look at that. Just lastly, if you want to do something, I think even veterans' pensions or mothers with children or who the hell knows what, you have to find a way to pay for it by cutting, if you want to strengthen this arm, cut this one. Except Iraq, except Afghanistan, and except God knows what. And we still have bases all over the world. And I was in the service in 54, 55, and 56 in Europe. And we had God knows how many troops there.